Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Lee Scott record.
This album as well. It's super offensive. The things on it I don't like. The things on it are not good.
Would you shut the fuck up? High Focus Records artist, UK rapper, and producer, and also battle rapper, Lee Scott. And this is his new record, which is entirely produced by producer and fellow rapper, Dirty Dike, who is actually quite cartoony, clever, very energetic and animated, has a very funny delivery, but not in a sort of jokey comedy type way. And he seems to be heavily influenced by East Coast hip-hop as well. And that style carries over in his production on this new Lee Scott project right here. But in comparison to Dirty Dike, Lee Scott has a very different vocal and lyrical approach. On this record, Lee Scott isn't quite so overt. He's not so silly and over the top. He's actually pretty laid back, chill, but also dark, kind of slack-jawed, which is definitely a change of pace from the very aggressive delivery he puts out there when he's in the midst of a rap battle, which ultimately I think is a pretty good thing. Lee Scott is a rapper who understands that there are some things that play, some things that work in that battle context that don't necessarily carry over into that album recording context. Now, this album is quite musical, especially with the jazzy, crackling, very textured beats all over this record, with nice, thick, warm bass lines, some DJ scratches here and there with some esoteric vocal snippets or samples that complement the theme or the concept of the song. Stylistically, this record is coming straight out of that boom bap, that jazz rap realm, but Lee's approach to this style is very dark. Like, this record is dark, lit only by the yellowy tint of streetlights and traffic signals. And I would also agree with many of the ad-libs and Lee Scott's ramblings and his lyrics all over this record that describe his flow in this album as buttery. If you're into artists like Joey Badass or Earl or Quasimodo, MF Doom, and even the more depressing side of Mac Miller, I think Lee Scott is especially like those last few that I mentioned, except he's a little more devious and mischievous, sometimes somewhat creepy, at least on the surface when you're listening to the aesthetic of this record. When you get into Lee's lyrics on a deeper level, you're gonna hear that a lot of what he's saying is kind of absurd, ridiculous, playful, maybe even has a tongue-in-cheek tone to it, or is at least satirical or kind of cynical or pulling a sharp jab at some kind of pop culture reference or phenomenon. And there's a little bit of a lyrical spectrum on this album. Some tracks like 8 o'clock in the morning are a little too verbose and heady and just are really difficult to interpret, for me anyway, and the hook just really isn't there. There's not really a strong song structure on this track. And then on the flip side of that, we have the song Sell Drugs, which lyrically feels just overly simplistic. Plus, I was not feeling the weak singing on the hook of this track. But there are a great deal of songs on this record that actually reach a very happy and enjoyable middle ground, like the title track, the opener on this thing, which I think is a pretty excellent mission statement for this record. There's also the very grimy and aggressive Don't Make Me, where some of the most violent lyrics on this entire record turn up against a pretty awesome, just off-kilter, choppy jazz rap beat. And then there are a series of other songs that kind of grab a lyrical concept, and Lee Scott does a good job of drawing that concept out for the entirety of the track. Like on the song Manatee Rap, which is a bit of a play on the joke that South Park made about Family Guy, about a bunch of manatees being in a tank and then just randomly assembling these places and, I guess, situations and jokes for these sort of comedic detours and non sequiturs that occur throughout Family Guy episodes. And it's an interesting sort of observation on how rappers just kind of string together entire songs by pulling together all these lyrical ideas that when you look at them, you know, in the wider scheme of things, they don't really have much of anything to do with each other. Other than that, they're all pulled together into this one track. Again, interesting observation, but not really an amazing song. But the song Spaced, though, which I really like, actually sticks to a lot of interstellar, intergalactic themes throughout the lyrics on this track, and I thought that was a pretty smart approach. The song Watch TV is a huge pop culture jab and just kind of makes fun of the whole TV medium. And the songs Everything is Money as well as the song Money Grip are dealing in greed and materialism, though not in an obvious way. It's not like Lee Scott is like rapping about the rollie on his wrist or anything like that. Kind of more about the power of money, or just kind of ogling a pile of money. And I have to commend Lee on his lyrics. I think with almost every hook here, with every verse here, he's coming through with a thought-provoking line, or just a funny observation, or something clever, or an interesting piece of wordplay, or he's just drawing on a theme that he set for himself on a track in a creative way. This is a thinking man's rap record. However, on this album, I do wish he'd be a little bit more aggressive. Just give his rhymes a little bit more oomph from time to time, because the constant, somewhat monotone, just really laid-back delivery that Lee has on this record does become a bit of a drag. After a while, I really sort of start feeling my mind gravitate toward the instrumentals, and I'm not really feeling much of what Lee is saying at all, just because the energy isn't really there. I guess the lack of energy kind of gets to me after one song, after another. Even if Lee does seem to be making some cool or interesting points with what he's saying, I think if there's any one line that kind of sums up Lee's delivery on this record, it's actually on one of the final tracks of this album. Ironically, the most aggressive track on the LP, the song Don't Tell Me, and I do love the second verse on this album because Lee really changes up his flow, gets a little speedier here and there, and he says, "Call me Alan, what's the point?" Which I think is a really amazing way of kind of summing up the strong sense of depression and apathy, but also gusto and humorousness that pervades this album. It's an interesting mix of emotions, but I just wish that we saw different mixes of emotions going from track to track. Overall, I liked this record, wasn't blown away by it. I think Lee has a lot of talent. I think there are some good songs on here, and if you're looking for some interesting rappers from the UK, give this record a listen, as well as many of the people on the same roster as him on High Focus, because there are a lot of talented rappers over there. And I also appreciate that Lee has done his hip-hop homework and is influenced so much by hip-hop music from America, but it doesn't sound like he's just playing rapper or anything like that. He seems like a pretty versatile, talented artist. I just don't think all of those talents and all of that versatility turned up on this record, because when you watch him in the midst of a rap battle and when you listen to him on a record, it's like hearing two completely different artists. I just wish a little bit more of that aggressive Lee Scott showed up on this record, and that's all. I'm feeling a decent to strong 6 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this record a listen? If you have, did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Lee Scott, forever.